What happens when a 67-year-old janitor walks into an MMA gym and challenges their best fighter to a match? You'd probably expect a quick knockout, maybe even an ambulance. But what unfolded that Tuesday afternoon in downtown Phoenix became the most watched underground fight video in combat sports history and revealed something the modern fighting world had completely forgotten. Welcome back to Tales of Wonder. If you enjoy stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about martial arts, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story that'll make you question reality. Now let's begin today's story. Marcus Chen had been mopping floors at Viper's Den MMA gym for 3 years, and in those 3 years, he'd become as invisible as the water stains he scrubbed from the locker room tiles. The fighters would brush past him in the hallways, their muscled frames glistening with sweat and arrogance, barely registering the slight, gray-haired man who always seemed to be cleaning something. To them, he was just part of the furniture, maybe less important than the heavy bags they pummeled daily, definitely less interesting than their Instagram follower counts. Matt didn't mind. Invisibility had its advantages. He'd watched them train from the corners of the gym, his mop handle resting against his shoulder like a staff, his weathered face betraying nothing. The head coach, the janitor Thompson, a former UFC middleweight contender with a 23-4 record and an ego twice the size of his trophy case, ran the gym with an iron fist and a loud mouth. Modern MMA is the pinnacle of human combat. Derek would shout to his students, his voice echoing off the walls that Matt had just finished wiping down. We've taken the best from every discipline, boxing, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and combined them into the ultimate fighting system. All those traditional martial arts, Kung Fu, Karate, Aikido, they're relics, museum pieces. They don't work against a trained MMA fighter. Period. The 20-something fighters would nod enthusiastically, their cauliflower ears and taped hands badges of their dedication to this ultimate system. They'd spend hours drilling takedown defenses, practicing ground and pound, and perfecting their sprawl and brawl techniques. And Matt would continue mopping. But something shifted one Tuesday afternoon in March. Derek had been particularly loud that day, recording a podcast right in the middle of the gym floor while Matt tried to clean around him. The topic? Why traditional martial arts are completely useless in real fighting. I'm serious, man, Derek said into his microphone, his guest nodding along. These kung fu masters with their flowery movements and their ancient wisdom, I could take any one of them apart in under 30 seconds. They've never felt real pressure. They've never had someone shoot a double leg on them while they're trying to do their little crane stance or whatever. The handful of gym members who'd gathered to watch the recording laughed on cue. I mean, we're all these deadly kung fu masters, right? Derek continued, warming to his theme. If their stuff actually worked, we'd see it in the UFC. We'd see it in real competition. But we don't, because it's all choreographed nonsense that falls apart the moment reality hits. Matt pauses mopping. For the first time in 3 years, he set the mop down against the wall and walked directly toward the podcast setup. The gym fell silent. Derek looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation. We're recording here, Matt. Can you clean somewhere else? I challenge you to a fight, Matt said quietly, his accent carrying the faint traces of his Guangdong province childhood. If I lose, I quit. If I win, you make a public video admitting that you know nothing about traditional martial arts. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds before the entire gym erupted in laughter. Derek's face cycled through several emotions: shock, amusement, then something darker. Here was this old janitor, this nobody who probably earned minimum wage scrubbing their toilets, challenging him in front of his students and podcast audience. Matt, Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension, I appreciate the entertainment, but I'm not going to beat up a senior citizen. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen, not to mention really bad optics. I sign waiver, Matt replied simply. No lawsuit. Just fight. One of Derek's top students, a heavyweight named Brian who was training for his professional debut, couldn't contain himself. Dude, do it. This is going to be hilarious. We can put on TikTok. Derek stood up, his 6'2" frame towering over Matt's 5'7". Look, I don't know what kind of point you're trying to make, but you say kung fu doesn't work, Matt interrupted, his tone still even, almost gentle. You say traditional martial arts are useless. So prove it. I am 67 years old. I am janitor. Should be very easy for ultimate fighter like you, yes? The trap was so beautifully laid that Derek didn't see it until he was already caught. If he refused, he'd look scared of an elderly janitor. If he accepted and won, he'd look like a bully. But the third option, that he might actually lose, didn't even enter his mental calculations. Pride made the decision for him. Fine, Derek said, shrugging off his podcast headphones. We'll do this right now. 3 5-minute rounds. Standard MMA rules. No eye pokes, no groin shots, no biting. That worked for you, old man. Matt nodded once. What happened over the next 15 minutes will be dissected by fight analysts, traditional martial arts practitioners, and confused MMA fans for months to come. They didn't even make it through the first round properly. Derek came out aggressive, exactly as his training dictated. He threw a quick 1-2 combination, testing Matt's reactions, then shot in for a takedown. The bread and butter of MMA dominance. Get the fight to the ground, use superior size and strength, and finish with ground and pound or submission. Except Matt wasn't there. The movement was so subtle that several people watching didn't even register it. Matt's feet shifted maybe 3 inches, his body angled 45 degrees, and suddenly Derek was grasping air, his momentum carrying him past his target and directly into a position of catastrophic vulnerability. What Matt did next looked like nothing. His hand touched Derek's back, barely a push, more like a suggestion, and Derek went sprawling onto the mat with the kind of force that comes from having your own energy redirected and amplified. Derek rolled, came up immediately, professional instincts taking over. He was more cautious now, circling, feinting. He tried a leg kick, the kind that had ended 2 of his professional fights. Matt's shin met his with a sound like which striking would, and Derek actually winced. "How are your legs that hard?" Derek muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He tried combinations, level changes, everything in his considerable arsenal. And every single time, Matt would make these tiny adjustments, a step that seemed too small to matter, a hand position that looked purely defensive, and Derek would find himself overextended, off balance, or simply unable to close the distance. It was like trying to punch smoke. 3 minutes into the round, Derek shot in for another takedown, this time fully committed. He got his hands on Matt's leg, finally solid contact, and began to drive forward with all his weight. Matt's hand came down on a specific point on Derek's neck. Not a strike, just pressure, and Derek's entire body went momentarily slack. In that half-second of muscular confusion, Matt executed a technique that hadn't been seen in competitive fighting in decades. A standing throw that involved controlling Derek's center of gravity with what looked like minimal effort, sending the much larger man sailing through the air before landing hard on his back. The impact knocked the wind out of Derek's lungs. Before he could recover, Matt was on him, but not in the way any MMA practitioner would expect. He didn't go for a mount or side control. Instead, he applied a wrist lock that involved maybe a 2-inch rotation of Derek's hand, and Derek's entire arm lit up with pain that shot straight to his shoulder. Derek slapped the mat frantically. Matt released immediately and stood, offering his hand to help Derek up. The gym was dead silent. Derek rose slowly, his face red, his breathing heavy. "What the hell was that?" "Wing Chun," Matt said simply, "with some Tai Chi principles, and bit of Baguazhang footwork. What you call useless traditional martial arts." Brian, the heavyweight student, was the first to break the silence. "Okay, that was weird, but I mean, Derek probably just had an off day, right? Or maybe he was going easy because you're, old." Derek's ego was bruised, but his competitive spirit was intact. "Run it back. Best 2 out of 3. I wasn't taking you seriously." Matt shook his head. "One match was agreement. But if you want to understand, I can show you something." He walked over to the wall where promotional posters hung. Fighters from the gym who'd competed professionally, their records proudly displayed. But Matt walked past all of those to a corner where older photos gathered dust. He pulled down one particular frame and brought it to the center of the mat. The photograph, dated 1976, was faded and showed a young Chinese man in his early 20s standing in what was clearly a fighting stance. But what made everyone lean in was the banner behind him. Southeast Asian Full Contact Fighting Championship. "This is you?" one of the students asked. Matt nodded. "I was professional fighter for 8 years. Not modern MMA, we didn't call it that then, but full contact, minimal rules. I fought in Hong Kong, Thailand, Philippines, Taiwan. My record was 37 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw. Both losses were to my Sifu, my teacher, during challenge matches." Derek stared at the photo, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "You never asked," Matt replied simply. "And I'm janitor now. That person," he gestured to the photo, "was long time ago." But one of the students, a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu named Amanda, who actually paid attention to details, had pulled out her phone and was frantically searching. Wait. Matt Chun. Chun Weiming? Oh my god. She turned her phone around, showing a Wikipedia page. You're that Matt Chun? You're the guy who fought in the Kumite tournaments before they got banned? The one they made that documentary about. The details spilled out as more students searched. Matt Chun, known in fighting circles as the Disappearing Dragon, had been one of the most feared full-contact fighters in Asia during the late 70s and early 80s. He'd fought in an era when mixed fighting meant combining various Chinese martial arts with some judo and karate, before the modern MMA rule set existed. But more than that, and this is what made Derek's face go pale, Matt had fought in no-holds-barred matches where the only rules were no weapons and no biting. He'd faced fighters 40 pounds heavier than him. He'd competed in tournaments where you might have 3 fights in one night against different opponents with different styles. And he'd almost never lost. Why are you working as a janitor? Amanda asked the question everyone was thinking. Matt's expression softened. I came to America in 1989 to take care of my sister, who was sick. She had no one else. After she died, I stayed. I had no credentials here, no college degree. Fighting career was over. Too old, too many injuries. So, I take jobs I can get. He shrugged. Cleaning is honest work. Gives me time to practice forms in morning before work. Derek sat down heavily on a bench. So, everything I said about traditional martial arts is not completely wrong, Matt said, and this surprised everyone. Many traditional schools do not train for real fighting anymore. They teach forms, but not application. They teach tradition, but not adaptation. This is true, but the problem is not the martial art itself. The problem is the training method and the teacher. He gestured around the gym. Modern MMA has many good things. You train with resistance, with real pressure. You spar hard. You learn what works through testing. This is excellent, but you also throw away centuries of knowledge because you do not understand it. What happened next transformed Viper's Den MMA gym in ways no one could have predicted. Derek, to his credit, didn't double down on his ego. Instead, he did something that would define the rest of his coaching career. He asked Matt to teach. Not to replace what we do, Derek clarified, his humility genuine, but to add to it. Show us what we're missing. Matt agreed with one condition. He would only teach students who genuinely wanted to learn, who could check their egos at the door, who understood that traditional martial arts weren't magic, but rather refined principles that had to be drilled and tested, just like anything else. The Tuesday and Thursday evening classes became legendary. Matt would take techniques the fighters already knew, say, a sprawl defense against a takedown, and show them how a slight adjustment in angle, borrowed from Baguazhang's circular footwork, could make the defense 30% more effective while using less energy. He'd demonstrate how Wing Chun's chain punching wasn't about throwing 100 weak punches, but about maintaining constant forward pressure that disrupted an opponent's defensive structure, setting up the power shots that modern boxers already knew how to throw. He showed the grapplers how Tai Chi's listening energy, the ability to sense an opponent's intentions through contact, could improve their sensitivity in clinches and on the ground, allowing them to react to submissions before they were fully locked in. But the real revelation came in sparring. Amanda, the purple belt who'd identified Matt, was the first to really get it. She was technically sound, but struggled against larger, stronger opponents. Matt spent 3 weeks teaching her how to use Tai Chi principles to redirect force rather than meet it head-on, and how to use subtle weight shifts that made her opponent's strength work against them. In her next competition, she submitted 2 opponents who outweighed her by 25 pounds each, using techniques that looked like standard Brazilian jiu-jitsu to the untrained eye, but incorporated principles she'd learned from Matt. Word spread. Other MMA gyms began noticing that fighters from Viper's Den moved differently. They were harder to hit, more energy efficient, and had this uncanny ability to sense and counter techniques just a split second earlier than should be possible. Derek, true to his word, made a video. But instead of a grudging admission of defeat, he made something better. A 40-minute breakdown titled, What Modern MMA Can Learn from Traditional Martial Arts, where he demonstrated specific techniques Matt had taught him, explained the principles behind them, and humbly admitted that his previous dismissal of traditional arts had been born from ignorance, not knowledge. The video went viral, garnering 3 million views in a week. But here's the thing that made the biggest impact. Matt didn't become some mystical kung fu master figure. He remained the janitor. He still mopped floors, still cleaned locker rooms, still took out the trash. But now, when he finished his cleaning duties, he'd change into a simple black uniform and teach class. The cleaning keeps me humble, he explained to a confused journalist who'd come to do a story. It reminds me that no matter what skill you have, service to others is honorable. And it keeps my legs strong. You know how many squats you do mopping gym floor every day? The gym's competition record improved dramatically. Within 6 months, 3 fighters from Viper's Den won regional championships, and 2 earned contracts with major MMA promotions. In their post-fight interviews, they all credited the ancient stuff Matt had taught them as the edge that made the difference. Derek's podcast evolved too. He started bringing on traditional martial artists, but with a new approach, demonstrating how their techniques could integrate with modern training methods, pressure testing everything, keeping what worked, and honestly discussing what didn't translate to competition. The episode featuring Matt, the janitor who humbled me, became the most downloaded episode in the podcast's history. 6 months after that fateful Tuesday, Derek was cornering one of his fighters at a UFC event when he ran into an old rival, a coach named Tony who ran a competing gym in Las Vegas. "Heard you got taken to school by your janitor," Tony said with a smirk. "Must have been embarrassing." Derek smiled. "Best thing that ever happened to me. Matt taught me that the difference between traditional martial arts and modern MMA isn't about which one is better. It's about understanding that we're all part of the same evolution. Those old masters were solving the same problems we're solving, how to fight effectively. They just had different contexts and different terminology." "That's a very diplomatic way of saying you got your ass kicked," Tony laughed. "Oh, I absolutely got my ass kicked," Derek agreed. "But you know what the wildest part is?" "What?" "Matt told me last week that he's been holding back in all his demonstrations. He said in his competition days, he fought with techniques that are too dangerous to teach in a modern gym setting, stuff that would cause permanent damage. The things he's been showing us are the safe applications of his art." Derek paused, letting that sink in. He's 67 years old, hasn't competed in 40 years, and he's still not showing us everything he knows. That's when I realized we're not preserving ancient knowledge in museums. We're rediscovering weapons we forgot we had. Here's something to think about. How much knowledge have we dismissed as outdated simply because we didn't understand the context in which it was developed? What else might we be overlooking in our rush to label everything as either modern and effective or traditional and useless? If this story made you rethink everything you thought you knew about martial arts, smash that like button and drop a comment below. Have you ever had a moment where someone you completely underestimated taught you a life-changing lesson? I'd love to hear your stories. And if you're hungry for more tales that challenge conventional wisdom and reveal hidden truths, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate. See you in the next video.